Hello, and welcome back to the MHT podcast. I'm Patrick Martin, your host, and I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for being a listener today and for making time to learn some new coping skills with me. First off, I'd like to apologize for not getting this podcast out over the last week or so. In case you were looking out for it, I have been focused with my free time this last week on making some tweaks to an online therapy practice I'm trying to get up and running here, and I think it's all good to go. So, do appreciate your patience with that. Okay, and just a reminder that the skills I am discussing in this series and for the next 5 episodes or so are fundamental coping skills for depression that are derived and adapted from an evidence based practice of psychotherapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, in which I am certified to practice by the Academy of Cognitive Therapy. Okay, and also the skills that I am covering are adapted from cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, and in particular, a workbook that I have covered multiple times now in therapy practice. And these are also the works of Dr. Jean Miranda and her cohorts. If you want to find the full reference there, you can just hop on over to the show notes. In the description, I'll put the link there, of course, as always. So feel free to check that out on the blog, and you'll find the full reference there should you want to check it out. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started.
Welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox Podcast, where you will gain the knowledge to thrive. Here is your host, licensed psychotherapist, Patrick Martin.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So glad you're joining in today. Had a pretty good week, pretty eventful. We've been couch hunting, my family and I, and I don't know if you've ever been couch hunting, but buying a sectional is a whole different ballgame than trying to just get a regular couch, right? Walked into the store after having eyeballed the house, took some approximate measurements, thought, oh, okay, yeah, sure, we have an idea of what will fit. Let me tell you, I was really surprised to find out that very specific measurements matter. Like, you would think I would know this walking in, but apparently height, width, depth, it all makes a difference, because if it can't get through your front door, then it's a no-go. And who wants to pay a restocking fee, right? And my goodness, like, even trying to remember like what couch is going to go past the windowsill now that you're pushing the couch up against the corner, to make sure it doesn't look weird, right? So little minutia like that are things that you would never consider. At least I didn't consider buying my first sectional going into the furniture store. So today was round 2 and had to come home yet again to take more measurements. And now I'm considering at all whether I want to buy a sectional. And anyway, that's kind of the adventure in my life this week. In addition to preparing for Girl Scouts, because it's now cookie season, and my wife is a Girl Scout troop leader and I'm co-leader, and so we picked up the cookies this morning, and so we had like 120 cases in the house, and we got to distribute those to the parents. And so our living room is full of cookies, lots of cookies, which is not great when you're trying to watch your calorie intake. So much for New Year's resolutions just yet. Okay, so, just going back to the whole idea of the couch thing, it got me thinking about coping skills, right? That's what this podcast is about, in addition to some other things, but coping skills. And, when it comes to life, relationships, managing stress, we can eyeball our situation and try and anticipate problems, and we think like, oh, okay, well, I have an idea what that looks like. When I come at it, I'll just figure it out as it comes. But much like trying to buy a sectional, it seems that, and we don't always, it doesn't always pan out the way we think it's going to. We don't always respond, or we're not as resilient as we think we're going to be from a distance. And so it's not until we get in there and we come at it and we start to measure things that we're like, well, maybe that angle isn't going to work. I'm going to have to come at this thing from a different angle. And that's really a lot of what therapy is. When you're sitting down with someone to get an objective viewpoint, as a therapist, it's my job to help people try and find out different angles or why maybe the approach they're taking at something isn't working, and they might be frustrated, disappointed, resolved. And it's not until they get perspective or start to problem solve the situation that they realize that, oh, well, maybe if I try it this way, or I try a different approach altogether, that turns out that what you thought you wanted isn't what you wanted, and maybe just the way you were coming at it isn't. So just an interesting, got me thinking today about that. We don't usually get things right the first time, and that's true with everything in life. Everything takes some intention, some forethought, and multiple attempts and observations before we figure out what it is that we're going to do to resolve the situation. Right. So anyway, that's been on my mind. So today we're picking up with step 7, and today we're going to talk about overcoming barriers to healthy activities. We've been talking about the importance of resuming old activities that we're familiar with, and then we talked about the importance of planning new activities. And so today we'll be talking about how to anticipate barriers to doing healthy activities. Okay? So tackling barriers to healthy activities is a valuable coping skill because the better we get at predicting problems, the sooner we're going to start to orient ourselves to the solutions to address those problems. And when it comes to problem-solving barriers to making actionable steps toward our recovery goals or our goals in general, we kind of have to first put on that detective hat and attempt to identify any anticipated obstacles that we may encounter in our efforts to accomplish our tasks. So the first step here that comes to mind is to list planned activities and then use our self-talk to hone in on the language to describe the reasons that we cannot accomplish the goal that we have set out to tackle, right? So the self-talk we use is really important because it helps us define our sense of adequacy and competence to accomplish a task. But there's something about our brain that immediately wants to find the objections. Well, I want to lose weight, but you can't because A, B, C, D, and E. Our brain is really good at that, coming up with the objections to a goal. So we might as well own it. You know what I mean? Like we might as well say, okay, yeah, I know those objections are there, so let's just lay those out on the table first. Examples could include things like statements to the self. I would do blank, but I cannot because, right? End quote. Which can translate into things like, quote, I would go to the gym after work, but I have to get home and do homework with my kids, end quote. The problem is already labeled in the justification for not doing the activity. The key here is to use the negative language as a jumping off point to begin the problem solving. So once we can identify the objections to why we think we can't accomplish the goal that we've set for ourselves, if that's not funny enough, then we know what we're working with and how we can start to challenge those objections or work around them, right? I mean, these objections are usually grounded in some reality, right? That's why we object. We can begin to problem solve the identified barriers by looking at our goal in more flexible terms. Ask yourself, why is this goal important to me? Maybe that goal is going to the gym. Maybe that goal is learning a new language. Maybe that goal is doing better at your job or being a better spouse or, working on your communication or being a better parent. Why is this thing that you have set out there as an objective, why is it important to you to begin with? If you do some digging, you will likely find out that this goal, let's just call it the gym, represents a value. It's a value-based goal, right? We think of exercise, it usually has some value to it, some meaning behind it. Otherwise, we wouldn't put ourselves through that kind of discomfort. So once you've kind of honed in on that, you can ask yourself, why is this important to me? And why is attending to my health important to me, right? So it's not just why is exercise important, it's why is being healthy important to me? What does that represent and how I identify in the things that, what the other things that are important to me? Maybe my health is important to me because I want to be around for my kids as they get older, or my grandkids. Maybe I want to be alive as long as I can with my partner. There's all kinds of reasons and values, and they're very personal and very meaningful, but we have to do the work to figure out what the value is inside of our goal once we drill down into it. And once you have the goal laid out in flexible terms, in accordance to its value, you can begin to brainstorm the potential solutions around it. So that's basically saying, like, once you have a better understanding, or you're being cognizant of the value about your goal, around your goal, then it'll be easier to push back against those objections that come up in that self-talk, that self-dialogue, when you start to feel the resistance, the apprehensions toward accomplishing your goal. And so the trick here is to not to overthink it, but just list ideas. And don't place any real value or judgments against them in terms of solutions, such as good or bad, but to just get in the habit of listing them as we brainstorm. Some solutions, if we were to continue to use exercise as an example, would be things like going for a walk on your lunch break versus waiting until after work, or going for a walk after your kids go to bed, or working out in the garage after doing homework with your kids, or lifting weights, or riding a stationary bicycle where your kids read to you. Getting in a workout before the kids wake up in the morning, right? Like getting up earlier. Hasn't worked for me yet. And a lot of these examples that I threw out there involve kids because that's a common thing we run into. That's a common problem I run into, because being present with my kids is very important to me. So, there's a lot of objections I can come up with around why, my activities around my kids are a barrier, but it's more about, okay, so that's a value, but so is being healthy, right? So how do we make them work in congruence as opposed to setting up these goals to compete against each other? For example, it's almost midnight and I'm recording this podcast because it's important to me to not take time away from my family, before my kids go down, before I get time on the couch with my wife. So that's a personal value, and so I have to make time for it. And yeah, there's still friction, right? There's still some sacrifice, but at least I know my goals are not competing against each other, because then it's easy to start feeling resentful toward one thing or the other when we're not accomplishing the things that are important to us. Okay, so step 3. Once you get to place some value on your ideas, you can start with the one that makes the most practical sense in context to that situation. So you may even be able to combine some of your ideas together, right? So we call that habit stacking. So if you can accomplish, putting your kids to, just for example, that's kind of silly, but putting your kids to bed, or reading to your kids while you ride your stationary bicycle where they lay in bed. I mean, that would be like habit stacking, or setting up your bicycle before you put your kids to bed, and then you can listen to your favorite podcast to catch up on episodes while you ride your bike, or something along those lines. But you find ways to streamline your behavior so it becomes more reasonable and fluid as you get into that new routine. And step 4, is really, this is about trial and error, putting your ideas to the test of life, and then rating them in terms of ease and payoff, right? So it's really important that the things that we do have as least friction or resistance as possible, but are also the things that have the biggest rewards, right? Less friction, higher payoff. That's the goal. And if you run into additional barriers, be sure to take note of those as well, because that'll come in handy later. And the last piece here is that if your initial idea does not pan out, you can just discard it, toss it aside and try the next one on your list, that list that you brainstormed, right? Those ideas. And then you continue the pattern until you discover what approach best fits into your life and rhythm right now, right? And understand this, that rhythms change. Our life rhythm changes on a semi-regular basis, right? Mine does. And you'll have to find new ways to fit these things into your rhythm, because what used to work may not work down the road in the next chapter of your life, and you're going to have to find a different way to make it fit. Before my daughter was born, I would go spinning at the gym at 5:30 in the morning. Well, it didn't take long till after she was born before I realized, hey, I'm not going to the gym at 5:30 in the morning. In fact, I stopped going to the gym altogether, and I eventually gave up my Gold's Gym membership because even though I had a great deal on it, it wasn't efficacious anymore to my role as parent, which is a new role that I assumed, and I had to make room for that. So I had to find other ways to exercise. Enter the jump rope, right? Something that's more convenient but still gets the job done. And so basically, you'll just need to tweak things to stay in step with life's demands as the chapters and seasons of your life change, all right? So the next thing I want to talk to you about is goal pacing, right? Now, goal pacing happens to be one of my all-time favorite Hall of Fame productivity skills, okay? And goal pacing reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which states, begin with the end in mind, right? That's Stephen Covey, and he lists it as his second habit in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, okay? So goal pacing, remember that one. And when thinking about healthy activities and goals around our activities, it helps to start with the ideal activity and break it down into actionable steps, right? Begin with the end in mind. And the reason that this is so effective is because our energy, our health, our time, and circumstances all change, right? They're all fluid, they're not static. And such as in our mind's eye, like when we think about life, when we think about our goals, right? They kind of sit still in time. But that's not how life actually works. We live life in real time. And so we have to understand that things are going to not turn out as we anticipate, as we expect, and certainly they're not going to stay the same, right? And so even if you find a sweet spot and this habit works for you and you find a rhythm, don't get too comfortable, because guess what? Things are going to change again, which is part of the beauty, right? To being alive is this human condition, is that life is always in flux. Things are new, right? And when we are predicting our schedules, keep this in mind, because it's important to project and reflect about the time and how we use it, but don't get too married to a particular idea. Just always understand that things are open to change. Now, goal pacing is a crucial element in addressing barriers to healthy activities. Okay, I really want you to take that from this episode, that goal pacing is a crucial element. And a great example for this skill is the activity of exercise. I've used that a lot in this episode just because I think most people can relate on one end or the other. I'm not one of those people who just naturally gravitate toward exercise. Like, I don't do the runner's high. Like, I don't like to run. I'll lift weights any day over running. But some people, they do tend to have an affinity toward running and endurance, but that's not me. If your ideal goal is to go to a spinning class 3 times a week at 5:30 a.m., then you would start considering the next best thing from your idea, and then the next best thing from that, and so forth, right? So when you're beginning with the end in mind, you're taking your ideal and then you're working backwards in incremental steps. And that way you're prepared if things don't turn out as expected. You already have in your mind's eye what the next option is. For example, you might say, okay, my ideal is to go spinning at 5:30 a.m. before work, but the next best thing would be 6 p.m. after work. And the next best thing would be spinning on the weekend. And the next best thing to that would be riding my bike around the local park. And the next best thing to that would be riding my stationary bike at home to a YouTube exercise video after the kids go to bed. You see how that works? You could even scale it down more from spinning to less intense types of exercise, depending on your energy level, such as jumping jacks, jump roping, walking, lunges, squats, and sit-ups. Sit-ups is not on my list. It's like the last thing I would do. But the rest, yeah, okay. Take note, however, that scaling your goals does not mean that you set loose goals. All right, there's a big difference. Scaling your goals does not mean you set loose goals. It is still important that you commit to a set time that makes sense in a given activity. This means that you have to plan ahead for multiple scenarios. All right, still with me? Good, because this brings us to our next point, which is all about finding balance. All right. Oh, there's that word again, right? Balance, life balance. I'm gonna level with you, okay? Right now, there is no such thing as absolute balance in our lives. At least not in my opinion. By this I mean that we can be intentional on how we are investing our time across our life domains, home, work, school, parenting, etc., which are often dictated by our needs and obligations. But it is not realistic to think that you can commit to such an even distribution of your time and that everything gets equal attention. All right, you can't say, oh, okay, I'm put 25% of my time into work and 25% at home and 25% into my hobbies. Life is not compartmentalized like that. Everything kind of bleeds into everything else, and some needs trump others based on the circumstances, right? So it's not realistic to think that you can just commit to an even distribution of your time. If you do, then you'll likely end up feeling down because you didn't meet your standard, which was unreasonable to begin with. So how we choose to spend our time has a direct correlation with how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about life. And so it's worth taking a periodic pause to really assess and reflect on how we're spending it. And not just in any one area, but across our life domains. And this will help us see if we can make more efficient use of our time, how we can make better decisions. So there's 4 steps when I'm thinking of life balance. These are the 4 things that come to mind for me. The first thing is to consider our responsibilities, the things we've committed to. Right? So if we list the things that cannot be ignored or neglected, I think of things like work, cooking, cleaning, laundry, kids, homework, etc. Because these are the categories that you will come back to when trying to find a balance in your time. Over and over again, because they're the things that can't be ignored or put off too long. The next thing that comes to mind is listing self-care activities. Now these might look different for you than they look like for me. Some people like to take long baths. Other people like to go for a nice evening stroll. Some people like grooming. Some people like listening or reading a book. So whatever floats your boat, list those things, and that way you know if you're spending enough time on those things when we start to prioritize our time. All right. The third thing is listing possible learning activities. So this would be things that build us up intellectually. These could be new skills that we learn, some new tech, a new app, a new skill set of some sort. Maybe it's a Udemy video, maybe you're going to YouTube some new interest. You're just expanding. They're intentional activities to expand your knowledge base. Okay? And the last step would be listing possible meaningful activities. So activities that have a lot of underlying value. So these would be altruistic things. Could be volunteer work. If you're religious, it could be around serving at your church or working with your local nonprofit, or doing something in the community for the community. Yeah, so could be Girl Scouts. I mean, anything that has to do with service and being of service, right? The majority of folks manage stress better, feel more content with life, and are most productive when they feel they have a sense of balance among all of the domains we just talked about. Okay? This allows people to perform better and to solve problems around healthy activities. They feel they are thriving along all of their life domains and the different roles they possess, such as provider, spouse, parent, employee, boss, etc. They feel that they have a good handle on work-life balance. Okay, you still with me? We just covered goal pacing and life balance. So let's talk homework. So in order to practice these skills, it's important to remember that not all activities are created equal and that they take on different forms and various demands on our time, as well as our energy, throughout our schedule. And for example, doing homework with your kid may take more time out of your day than cooking dinner. So to be fair, try and consider the cost and weight of each activity, not just trying to balance the numbers. Well, I did one thing in this area with my kids and I did one domestic thing over here. No, it's like more about what's the demand on your time and trying to weigh that out to make it even. Okay. So you can make your own list. You can make a list of the varied activities that you plan to do this week. Take out your calendar, look ahead, ask yourself, okay, so what things are kind of staples in my schedule? What kind of wiggle room do I have? And then you can assign the amount of time that you think each activity will take. You can look at your calendar for the week, right? And you can see if you can balance the weight and time of each activity across the week to see if you can maybe move some things. Like if your Tuesday is really swamped, but Wednesday has some open space, maybe you could save some of your Tuesday tasks to Wednesday, and just try and be mindful that way so you can kind of balance it out a bit. You can also prioritize your activities across your life domains that we discussed. You can try to not leave any particular domain neglected, like, say, oh, I'll catch up on all my exercise on the weekend, because that's not going to happen. At least it doesn't for me, and it probably doesn't feel very good when you feel like you have to play catch up. So if you can squeeze in, 3 30-minute workouts, it's probably going to do you better than trying to squeeze in a 2-hour workout on the weekend. Now, you can roll the leftover activities into the following week's schedule. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to get to everything that you set out to do. I certainly never do. I keep a running to-do list on my Google Keep Notes. And whenever I have something that I think I need to attend to, I just throw it on the list and then I slide them around in the order that I think I will get to them or plan to get to them. And the things that I don't, that's okay. It's just a running to-do list. I'm not putting deadlines on everything. Okay. All right. So that's the homework for that portion, if you want to give it a go. Now we're going to move on to pleasure predicting. All right. So pleasure predicting is just what it sounds like. It's the ability to anticipate the satisfaction we will get from a particular activity that we plan to engage in. And a fundamental problem with depression and people that suffer from depression is that it interferes with our ability to accurately predict or anticipate the level of satisfaction that we're going to derive from a given activity. And this creates an all too common barrier to setting out to do healthy activities or new activities. It's at the root of social isolation, which is a common and detrimental symptom of depression. And if we allow this to continue, it lends toward a state of anhedonia, right? You'll hear a depressed person say, oh, I just don't feel like doing what I used to do. It doesn't make me happy anymore. Everything is just kind of blah, right? That's anhedonia. That's like loss of interest in all activities, even the things you used to enjoy. And that's kind of what comes up to the surface when we stay isolated too long. Now we can disrupt this pattern, and there's 5 essential steps to it. So when we're trying to disrupt social isolation and negative pleasure predicting, these are the things you want to keep in mind. The first thing is to try and commit to a potentially enjoyable activity and write it down. That could be going to the movies, be playing a sport, doing a puzzle, things that would typically make you happy when you're not depressed. Then I want you to consider how you can state the planned activity to take place under the most ideal circumstances. This will help you create a positive outcome if you're thinking about how you can stage it, right, to be the most likely to yield a positive outcome, right? So if you're going to go to the movies, try and go to the movies at a time that you would normally like to go, or with people that you would normally like to go with, and don't just say, oh, well, I'm just going to pick a random movie, and then, oh, I hated that movie. I know I wasn't going to have a good time. See? I was right. No. Plan as if you were excited about it. This may include things like considering the time of day, your favorite mall, your favorite movie theater, things you like to do alone, things you like to do with others, the kind of weather that's going to be going on outside, and so forth. The third thing to consider is how you rate your activity level and satisfaction for the activity on whatever scale works for you. 1 to 100, 1 to 10, percentages, grades, emojis, whatever does it for you. It's important that you consider how you're going to rate your activity. All right. And the next thing, step 4, is to actually do the activity that you set out to do, even if you're not sure if you'll enjoy it. So even if it's like the day before and you're like, ugh, I'm just not feeling it. Do it anyway. All right. But it's important that you rate your anticipated level of satisfaction. So if this is like based on a scale of 1 to 5, and you say, oh, I think I'll be a 3 in terms of satisfaction for having gone to the movie. Now this is you projecting before you go. And then after you go to the movie, you're going to rate how much you actually enjoyed it. Okay? All right, so that's pleasure predicting. Sounds pretty basic, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You're planning an activity, then you're anticipating how much you're going to enjoy it, and then you do it, and then you rate it again, and then you compare your prior rating compared to your post rating, and you see which is more valid. All right, so how can you go about the homework with the pleasure predicting? Very basic. Use a mood scale to track your mood. If you don't have one, you can just use your calendar. You can journal your own stuff, or you can use the mood scale I provide on the website. You can just subscribe and download that. You can list the number of healthy activities you engage in every day. You can also choose one activity from the 4 types discussed, which were enjoyable activities, value-based activities, self-care activities, and educational activities, right? And then you do them. You can pick one category. Then you want to do the whole pleasure predicting we just talked about, rating your anticipated satisfaction before and after, right? And if you find it difficult to engage in a healthy activity, just remember the skills we discussed around problem solving, goal pacing, pleasure predicting, and balancing your time. Okay? That'll help you address these obstacles, because usually when you start to do the work, you're going to get a lot of those objections we talked about and that self-talk. And if you lean on these skills, it's going to help you push past that discomfort, that friction, and then you'll start to see the benefits. Okay. So in the next episode, I will be covering some of the skills to leverage healthy activities as a way to increase your goal-oriented behavior. So this will be continuing to focus on the activity, that second pillar of skills, in order to improve our mood over time. Okay. If you found any of this helpful, feel free to leave a review on iTunes or your podcasting platform. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to use the contact form. I put those in the show notes. If you have any suggestions, requests for content, please include that. As always, if you feel like you are at risk and need to talk to someone, there is a lot of help out there. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can text START, S-T-A-R-T, to 741-741. And if you need general mental health help, you can call the NAMI referral line at 1-800-950-6264, and the California Statewide Mental Health Helpline at 1-855-845-7415. Disclaimer, I am a licensed psychotherapist, but I am not your therapist, and this podcast does not substitute professional help. If you need a professional, use those resources I just gave you to find one. And in the meantime, practice these skills, more tools for your toolbox. And I really appreciate you listening in today. I'll catch you in the next episode. You have a great week. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Mental Health Toolbox Podcast. Learn more at www.thementalhealthtoolbox.com.